Let me tell you the biggest mistake people make when it seems like God has gone quiet. They assume he's done working. They assume silence means absence. But I promise you this, God is not ignoring you. He is setting you up for something greater than you imagine. You're watching this right now because you're either waiting, hurting, doubting, or wondering if God still sees you. And I need you to do one thing. Don't click away. Don't scroll past this. Because this message, it's the confirmation you've been asking for. I don't care if you've seen 100 videos today. This is the one. You've been praying for clarity, and God's answer is coming, but you have to be still long enough to hear it. So listen to me closely. Watch this until the end. Because somewhere in this video, there's a word with your name on it, a breakthrough hidden in the message, a truth you've been waiting to hear. This is your divine appointment. This is not an accident. And by the time we finish, you're going to realize something powerful. God has been working the whole time, even when it felt like nothing was happening. So stay with me. Lean in. Don't miss what he's about to reveal to you, because the surprise that's coming will make sense of everything you didn't understand. You thought he was silent, but what if that silence is where the miracle is being formed? You might be looking around at your life right now and wondering, why is nothing happening? Why is everything so still? But let me tell you something I've learned through some of the hardest seasons of my life. God does his deepest, most transformational work in silence. You may not see it. You may not feel it. But that doesn't mean he's not moving. Just because the stage is empty doesn't mean the story has ended. It means the scene is changing. When a seed is planted, you don't hear it. You don't see it. But beneath the surface, something powerful is taking root. That seed is breaking open, forming roots, reaching down into the soil, building strength before it ever breaks the surface. And that's exactly what God is doing in your life. He is preparing the foundation before the elevation. You're not being ignored. You're being developed. You're not being punished. You're being positioned. I remember a time when I cried out for a breakthrough, but nothing changed. I begged for a sign, and all I got was silence. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. I thought God had left me behind. But later, when the pieces came together, I realized that he was never absent. He was orchestrating everything in the background, relationships, opportunities, and even obstacles, to align perfectly with his plan for my life. I just couldn't see it at the time. And you might be in that very place right now, questioning, doubting, waiting. But I want you to hear this. Silence from God is not abandonment, it's arrangement. He's setting up the miracle in such a way that when it finally arrives, you'll know it could have only been him. It will be undeniable. The silent season you're in now is not the end of the story. It's the soil where the next chapter is growing. You may feel buried, but you're not buried. You're planted. And when God is ready, you will bloom in a way that shocks everyone, including yourself. Trust the silence. That's where the sacred work is happening. But here's the real test. Not when God speaks, but when he doesn't. Can you still trust him then? Let's be real. It's easy to trust God when everything is going your way. When the blessings are obvious. When the prayers are answered. When life feels smooth and full of momentum. Of course you believe then. But that's not where real trust is built. Real trust is forged in silence, in confusion, in those dark, lonely nights when nothing makes sense and heaven seems completely quiet. I've been there. I know what it feels like to pray and hear nothing back. To cry out for direction and all you get is stillness. And if you've ever asked, God, where are you? I want you to know, You're not crazy, and you're not alone. That feeling, that silence, it's not punishment. It's preparation. It's divine training. God is teaching you to walk by faith, not by sight. He's building something in you that can't be built when everything's going right. You want to know why it hurts so much when you can't trace Him? Because you were never meant to rely on feelings. You were meant to rely on faith. You're not being ignored. You're being refined. And let me tell you something powerful. God hides not to distance Himself, but to develop you. He hides to deepen your dependence, to sharpen your vision, to strengthen your character. And when the silence finally breaks, you will realize you've grown into a version of yourself you never knew was inside of you. I remember seasons where every door stayed shut, every opportunity slipped through my fingers, and I felt like I was going backwards. But now I can see. It wasn't rejection. It was redirection. God wasn't punishing me. He was protecting me from rushing into something I wasn't ready for. And He's doing the same for you. You're not being delayed. You're being developed. So the next time you feel lost, when nothing around you confirms the promise He made to you, choose to believe anyway. That's the moment when faith becomes real. Faith is not believing when you see. It's believing when you can't. And that kind of faith, it's unshakable. That kind of faith unlocks doors no man can shut. It moves heaven. Keep trusting, even when you can't trace Him. He's not gone. He's just preparing a surprise that will be worth every second of the silence. Because when faith meets delay, something dangerous can rise up inside us. Urgency. And urgency, it can ruin everything. You and I, we want things fast. We live in a world of instant answers, overnight shipping, and now or never decisions. But let me break a truth to you that changed everything for me. God is never in a hurry, but He's never late either. His timing, it's not random. It's divine. It's surgical. It's exact. It doesn't bend to your clock. It obeys His purpose. I know what it feels like to want something so badly, you're willing to force it, to rush it, to settle just to escape the waiting. But let me warn you, if you rush the process, you risk missing the promise. God is not just preparing the blessing for you. He's preparing you for the blessing. That takes time. That takes stillness. That takes trust when every cell in your body is screaming, move. I've made decisions out of urgency before. I jumped ahead of God thinking I was helping Him out. And every time, it cost me peace. It cost me energy. And it always led me back to where I started, this time, with more pain and less patience. Don't confuse delay with denial. Just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it's not on the way. Some things are delayed because God is protecting you from what you can't see. Some doors don't open because what's behind them could destroy you right now. You may be ready in your mind, but God is waiting until you're ready in your spirit. Until your character can carry the weight of what He wants to give you. That job, that opportunity, that relationship, that healing, it's not just about getting it. It's about keeping it. And God loves you too much to give you something that will crush you. So breathe. Be still. Let go of the pressure to perform. Divine timing is not about speed. It's about alignment. And when the time is right, God won't whisper. He'll move suddenly. And you'll realize that every second of the wait was a setup for a breakthrough you couldn't have imagined. Life can feel overwhelming. We're surrounded by challenges, pain, negativity, and distractions pulling us in every direction. But through every struggle, there's one answer: God. Here on Jesus Daily Blessings, I share messages to guide you, uplift you, and remind you of God's promises for your life. If you want to stay closer to God, subscribe to our channel, and let's walk this faith journey together. You're not the first to walk through this quiet fire. Others have walked it too, and their silence changed the world. If you ever doubt that God moves in silence, just look at how He's always worked through history. The Bible is filled with people who were anointed in private, tested in obscurity, and elevated in power after seasons of complete silence. And if He did it for them, He will do it for you. Think of Joseph. Betrayed by his brothers, thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and locked in prison for years. Not days, not months, years. And during that time, silence. No voice from heaven. No angelic rescue. Just suffering and uncertainty. But in the silence, God was shaping a ruler. He was preparing Joseph not just to survive, but to reign. One morning he woke up in a prison, and by nightfall, he was in the palace. That's the power of God's silent work. Or Moses, 40 years in the wilderness, alone, hidden, forgotten. The same man who once stood strong in Pharaoh's courts now wandered sheep fields in obscurity. But what the world saw as failure, God saw as formation. Because when God finally called his name from the burning bush, Moses wasn't the same man. He was humble. He was ready, prepared in silence, released in power. And then there's Esther, positioned quietly in the king's palace. No flashing signs. No parting seas. Just subtle, divine orchestration. She didn't even know she was being prepared to save a nation. But when the moment came, she was exactly where God needed her to be. One decision, one step of courage, and history shifted. You see, the silent seasons aren't wasted. They're woven. And behind every moment of waiting, God is writing a story that's bigger than what you're asking for. You may feel forgotten, but you are being formed. You are in good company. And when the time comes, God will release what He's been refining in you. Just like Joseph. Just like Moses. Just like Esther. And just like them, your silence will end in significance. But not every blessing comes dressed in favor. Some come hidden in frustration, in failure, in what you were sure was a no. Here's something that might shock you. Sometimes, the greatest blessings come disguised as disappointments. What looks like rejection is actually redirection. What feels like a loss is sometimes the exact thing that's setting you up for the win. But you won't see it unless you learn to look with eyes of faith. I can't tell you how many times I thought God was saying no, when really, He was just saying, not this because I have something better. I've cried over closed doors, only to later thank God they didn't open. Why? Because now I can see what He was saving me from. And I bet, if you think hard enough, you've had moments like that too. God hides blessings in silence, in pain, in detours, because He's not just blessing you with stuff. He's blessing you with wisdom, with growth, with discernment, with strength. And often, it doesn't come wrapped in joy. It comes wrapped in confusion, wrapped in heartbreak, wrapped in silence. Underneath, a divine surprise is waiting to be revealed. That closed door, it protected your destiny. That unanswered prayer, It redirected your future. That delay, it deepened your character. You wanted comfort, but God gave you growth. You wanted escape, but He gave you endurance. Why? Because He's more interested in making you whole than keeping you happy. And sometimes, wholeness requires a little bit of wilderness. I want you to look at your life right now. What feels disappointing? What looks like failure? What are you tempted to give up on? Now ask yourself this. What if this is the very thing God is using to bless you? What if the struggle isn't a curse? It's a container for glory. Don't miss the miracle, because it didn't come in the wrapping you expected. God doesn't always send blessings with fireworks. Sometimes they arrive in whispers, in tears, in silence. But when the truth is revealed, you'll fall to your knees and say, "Now I understand. He was blessing me all along." And while you've been waiting on the promise, maybe God's been waiting on something too, a version of you He can trust. You've been asking God to change your situation, but what if He's using your situation to change you? What if the silence you're experiencing isn't punishment, but preparation for your purpose? You see, God doesn't waste the quiet seasons. He uses them to chisel away everything that doesn't belong: fear, pride, impatience, and shape you into someone who can carry what's coming next. When I went through my own silent season, I thought God had left. I felt abandoned, forgotten. But what I didn't realize at the time was that God was closer than ever. He was just speaking in a different language: stillness. And in that stillness, I found something I never expected me. The real me. The one not distracted by noise. The one no longer defined by other people's opinions. The one who learned how to hear God's whisper in the depths of silence. Silence exposes who you really are. When everything is stripped away, when you don't have the answers, the applause, or the assurance, that's when the real work begins. And that's when God leans in and says, "Now we build." In the quiet, He breaks down what's fake and breathes life into what's real. Maybe you've been waiting for a miracle, but God's been waiting for you to surrender, to soften, to listen. Because before He gives you the breakthrough, He has to make sure you won't break under it. That kind of strength only comes from the furnace of silence. The pressure, the pruning, the patience. And yes, it hurts. Yes, it's lonely. But it's also holy. Don't despise this shaping season. Don't rush through it. This is sacred ground. Because when God gets through with you in the silence, you'll walk out with a spirit unshakable, a faith unbreakable, and a heart that no storm can shake. He's not just blessing you, He's building you. And trust me, when the silence lifts, the world will see the glory that only comes from those who have been forged in the quiet fire of God's love. Because when the shaping is done, that's when the silence breaks. And when it breaks, He doesn't whisper, He moves. Let me speak this into your spirit right now. God has a surprise with your name on it. And it's not just any kind of surprise. It's the kind that shifts your entire life. The kind that comes when you least expect it, after you've cried, doubted, and almost given up. It's the kind of breakthrough that reminds you, God was never absent. He was just waiting for the perfect moment to show you His glory. I know what it feels like to wait and feel like nothing is happening. To serve, to believe, to hope, and still see no change. But what if I told you that's exactly where miracles are born? Not in noise, not in busyness, but in silence. And when God decides it's time to move, He moves suddenly, unexpectedly, unapologetically. One moment you're overlooked, the next you're overbooked. One day you're in the pit, the next you're in the palace. That's the nature of divine surprises. They don't ask permission. They don't give warning. They just happen. And they prove, once and for all, that God has been working behind the scenes in ways you couldn't imagine. I've seen it in my own life. Long stretches of silence, where I thought the promise had died, only for God to breathe life into it again, better than I prayed for. That's His style. That's His fingerprint. He's not just a promise maker, He's a promise keeper. And when He delivers, He does it in such a way that no man can take the credit. You'll know it was Him. You'll know it was grace. So don't count God out because you haven't seen the fruit yet. The surprise is already scheduled. It's on heaven's calendar. And when it shows up, you'll realize the silence was part of the setup. He wanted to exceed your expectations so deeply that He had to hide the process to preserve the glory. Get ready. Your divine surprise is closer than you think. But here's the thing. A surprise requires a steward. What you do before it shows up will decide if you can handle it when it does. Here's what no one tells you. What you do in the waiting determines what God can trust you with when the waiting ends. Anyone can praise when the blessing shows up. Anyone can be faithful when the prayers are answered. But the real test, can you stay loyal, obedient, disciplined, and hopeful when nothing is moving? That's what separates the casual from the call, the temporary from the timeless. I know waiting can feel like torment. It's the tension between what you believe and what you see. The promise is real, but the progress feels invisible. And the enemy loves to whisper, maybe it's not going to happen. Maybe you missed it. Maybe God changed His mind. But I came to silence that voice today. Listen to me. God never forgets what He promises. He finishes what He starts. But He does it in His time, not yours. Faithfulness isn't just about believing. It's about consistency. It's about waking up every day and choosing to honor God even when you feel forgotten. It's about praying with no evidence, serving with no applause, building with no blueprint, just faith. That's when heaven starts leaning in. That's when God says, now I know I can trust you. I walked through seasons where I wanted to quit, where everything in me said, give up, walk away, it's pointless. But something deep in my spirit said, keep going. Keep believing. Keep preparing. And when the blessing finally came, I didn't have to get ready. I was already ready because I stayed faithful in the wait. That's what God is looking for in you. Not perfection. Not performance. Just faithfulness. He watches what you do in private before He blesses you in public. Stay steady. Stay anchored. Don't let silence make you silent. Your faithfulness in this season is storing up favor for the next. Don't stop showing up. The reward is closer than it looks. And for those who feel like the wait has lasted too long, if you're feeling forgotten, hear this. You're closer than you think. Let me speak straight to your soul right now. You're tired. I know. You've been fighting, believing, waiting, and still nothing seems to change. You've whispered prayers no one else heard. You smiled in public while silently breaking in private. And now you're wondering, has God forgotten me? No. He hasn't forgotten you. He's preparing something better. I know what it feels like to reach that breaking point, to question everything. I've laid awake at night, asking God why the silence felt like abandonment. I've pleaded, just give me a sign that you still see me. And friend, let me tell you what I've discovered in those low, quiet places. God's silence is not God's absence. His delay is not a denial. His stillness is not a stop sign. It's a setup. When you're weary, that's not the time to give up. It's the time to dig deeper. Because right before a breakthrough, there's always a battle. Right before the light, the night gets darkest. And just when it feels like nothing is happening, everything is being arranged behind the scenes. You just can't see it yet. I want you to feel this in your bones. God sees you. He hears every whisper. He catches every tear. And in the right moment, He will respond. Not just with an answer, but with a breakthrough so specific, so personal, that it will silence every doubt you've ever had. His silence is full of precision, packed with purpose. He's not punishing you. He's preparing a table for you. So, don't lose heart. Don't give in to the lie that it's over. If you're still breathing, God's still working. And when He moves, He's going to do it in such a way that you'll look back and realize He never left. He was just working silently to surprise you. Hold on, weary soul. Heaven has not forgotten your name. So what do you do now, in this holy hush before the breakthrough? Simply you prepare like it's already yours. Now comes the moment where you shift from waiting to preparing. You've heard the promise. You've walked through the silence. You've trusted when you couldn't trace Him. But now, it's time to prepare your heart for the surprise God has been shaping in secret. Here's the truth. You don't get to choose the timing, but you do get to choose your posture. Will you meet your blessing with bitterness or with boldness? Will you be ready when the door opens, or too weary to walk through it? See, what's coming isn't small. It's not average. It's divine. And that means it requires a version of you that's expectant, not exhausted, hopeful, not hesitant. To live with faith, not dulled by fear. So today, I challenge you, start preparing like it's already on the way. Clean the room for the blessing. Open space in your heart for the miracle. Speak words of gratitude before you even see the answer. Why? Because faith celebrates in advance. Faith gets dressed before the invitation arrives. Faith praises before the walls fall. I've done it. I danced before the deliverance. I shouted thank you before the breakthrough even showed up. And every single time, without fail, God came through in a way that blew my expectations apart. That's His nature. He's not a God of halfway blessings. He's the God of more than enough. So live with that kind of bold expectancy. Wake up tomorrow like it could be the day. Prepare your spirit. Prepare your space. Prepare your mind. Because the very thing you've been praying for is about to show up, unannounced, but right on time. And when it does, don't act surprised. You'll know, deep in your spirit, that the silence wasn't empty. It was pregnant with power. God was working silently to surprise you. And now, the moment has come. Get ready to receive it. So, if you believe God is working silently to surprise you, then be part of the surprise He's preparing for someone else. This mission, to spread His word, ignite faith, and awaken souls around the world, needs hearts like yours. Every super thanks, every membership, every gift is a seed. And when you sow into this, you're not just supporting a video. You're fueling revival. Whoever sows generously will also reap generously, 2 Corinthians 9:6. So give in faith. Shine your light, and let God use your yes to change eternity. Now it's your turn to move. You've heard the message. You've felt the truth. Now, it's time to declare your faith before you see the outcome. Because what you speak shapes what you step into. Right now, in the comments, I want you to write these words and claim them with boldness. God is working silently, and I'm ready for his surprise. Say it with your whole heart. Let heaven hear it. Let your situation hear it. Because this isn't just a comment, it's a declaration. A spiritual announcement that you're shifting from waiting to expecting, from wondering to worshiping, from surviving the silence to celebrating the Seta. And don't stop there. Tag someone who's in a silent season. Be the one who brings light into their dark room. Share this video with someone who's been questioning if God even hears them. Be the answer to their secret prayer. If this word hit your heart, don't let it pass by. Activate it. Engage with it. Speak it out loud. Write it down. Faith isn't passive. It's prophetic. So again, drop this in the comments now. God is working silently, and I'm ready for his surprise. Because your words carry power, and your declaration might just be the trigger that unlocks your divine surprise. Amen. Please like this video and leave a heartfelt amen in the comments. If you want to stay closer to God, subscribe to our channel